Welcome to Wireless and IoT Security. In Chapter 10, we talk about WLAN IP Network Risk Assessment. In this chapter, we'll talk about risk assessment, IT security management, security risk assessment stages, and security audits. Risk assessment are used to determine any change in requirements, technology, or threat since the last risk assessment. Is performed less frequently than security audits. Assessment process include identification and analysis of the following: all assets related to the system or network, non-threats that affect the security of the system or network, system or network vulnerabilities, potential impacts and levels of risk associated with threats, required measures to mitigate the vulnerability and threat. Okay. Under system and network vulnerability, you have the interception, which applies to data that travels over the network. The availability, system, servers, and applications must be available for the purpose they serve. Your access, which refers to the points where remote users can join the network, where internal users can communicate with the outside world. So these are some controls used to address existing vulnerabilities. Data encryption is to address interception. Fault tolerant and high availability designs that eliminate single points of failure, address availability. Firewalls, IPS, IDS, and secure SSL or VPN concentrators address access. You should conduct a security assessment at least every 3 years, or when new technologies or major changes are introduced to the system or network. For example, bring your own device and bring your own application have introduced new vulnerabilities and risks that previous risk assessment did not identify. Perform a fresh, comprehensive assessment. Okay, what are the most common risks on a WLAN, a business network? Exposure of critical information to wireless snippers and eavesdroppers, leakage of critical information beyond the network boundaries on unsecured devices, theft of data, loss, theft, or hijack of a mobile device, fraud caused by disruption, eavesdropping, and copying your data, viruses, worms, and trojans. Some of the key elements necessary to mitigate risk are access control, user authentication, data encryption, intrusion prevention, antivirus and malware software, standards, guidelines, and policies, network perimeter, internet security, transmission security, and application web services. Some of the other types of risk assessment: field production assessment, which is a comprehensive but scope is restricted to production of information system before it's rolled out. We have a high-level assessment. It involves high-level risk analysis across the entire network with a deep or fully detailed technical review. Typically applied during planning phase of network or system development before the design process begins. Let's talk about IT security management. It involves several related activities that may be performed as a part of a cycle or repeating security processes. Security practices and policies should be appropriate for size and value of network and its assets. It should be cost effective and in proportion to the value of what is to be protected. In the very first step, identify assets needing protection and their relative value and the importance of the company. Let's look at the methodology. There are two. In a quantitative assessment assigns a monetary value to assets, resulting in a quantitative statement on risk and the cost of impact. A qualitative assessment is a subjective calculation of risk by assigning a level, low, medium, or high, and probability multiplier to determine the risk and impact level. A qualitative approach is the most commonly used one. Also need to look at the legal requirements. Laws and regulations require periodic risk assessment in different enterprise environment. The Baines-Oxley Act and the HIPAA require security and control infrastructure to be put in place. Compliance with this act requires a company may be able to prove to an independent auditor that it has effective and reasonable security in place. What are some other justification of risk assessment? You could justify cost of security. Assessing a security risk is typically the initial step in security management. Network auditors can use assessment as the basis for establishing a security program. It promotes communication and productivity and breaks down interdepartmental barriers. Interdepartmental collaboration raises awareness of security and its requirements. So let's look at some terminologies. An asset is anything of value, such as people, property, intellectual property, or information, or what you are trying to protect. A threat is anything that can damage or compromise an asset. What you are trying to protect against. Vulnerability is a weakness that makes a threat possible or even probable. Can be a gap in the protection measures against a threat. Risk is a combination of all three. Asset times threat times vulnerability is risk. Also, risk is a function of threat exploiting a vulnerability to damage an asset. If there is no vulnerability, there is no risk. If there is no threat, there is no risk. And what are the stages of your assessment? Your planning, your information gathering, your risk analysis, your identifying and implementing controls, and your monitoring. Planning occurs before security risk assessment can take place. You identify stakeholders, their roles, and responsibilities. You also seek information, give information, and document it. In information gathering, we look at the security policy objectives. You also system and network architecture, as-built designs and diagram, physical asset inventories, network protocols and services, access control procedures, firewall deployment and policy, identification and authorization mechanisms or systems, documented policies and guidelines. We also do a general controls review or GCR. It identifies a threat existing in the general security process and is concerned with the high level security of an existing system. When we do a systems review, it seeks to identify vulnerabilities at the network and the application levels. Review team attempts to spot abnormal behavior, such as repeated unsuccessful login attempts on secure accounts like administrator or root. In the risk analysis phase, we use risk analysis techniques to determine value of assets and identify associated risk. Some of the sub-processes are asset identification and valuation, threat analysis, vulnerability analysis, asset threat amount mapping, impact and probability assessment, and risk analysis. So let's go through some of these sub-processes. A risk assessor must identify all assets that fall within the scope of risk assessment. You may have physical and real, like servers, hardware, network devices. You may intangible assets, information service, or reputation. Each asset should be classified by categories such as process, application, server, router, or information. Assessor place value on each asset: tangible values, intangible values, information values, the name and type of information flows, whether incoming, outgoing, physical location of physical assets, software installed on servers, indicating showing the importance of value asset, indicators of services supplied by the asset, values assigned to each individual asset. We also look at different types of threats. There are social threats. They are related to human actions, can be either intentional or unintentional. You have technical threats, which are results from technical issues or faults. You also have environmental threats, such as storms, flood, fires, and power outages. When the vulnerability analysis is the identification, evaluation, and documentation of existence of vulnerabilities. Each vulnerability is categorized by degree of importance, such as low, medium, high. Identify mission critical assets and their vulnerabilities first. For technical vulnerabilities, you can use a vulnerability scanner like Nessus, Chained or OpenVAS. Scanner detects vulnerabilities in operating systems, applications, web servers, and services, including open ports and missing OS and security patches. You could do a version analysis. Vulnerability scanner typically use version analysis. Scanner sends out request to target system, upon receiving response, it has a headers for version details. The other way is behavior analysis. It relies on how the system responds to requests. Aim is to find an unexpected response. In asset threat environment mapping, it's a documentation of pairing your asset vulnerabilities with the potential threats that could expose those vulnerabilities. It can be too resource intensive. Impact assessment its purpose is to determine the consequences, including the degree of harm of a threat exploiting a vulnerability on an asset. If all threats cannot be assessed, address only those assets and threats and vulnerabilities with the most severe potential impact. Probability assessment is also called a likelihood assessment. It is used to identify the greater or lesser threats based on a score rather than a mathematical probability. Express results in terms of high, medium, or low based on ability or motivation of threat source, nature of vulnerability, and the effectiveness of security control. Risk analysis involves analyzing results and presenting them using any of the following methods: quantitative and qualitative methods, a risk map, a matrix approach. Qualitative methods rely on assessors' subjective assumptions. Quantitative methods are expressions in financial worth. You have SLE, a single loss of expectancy, the expected monetary cost of occurrence of a risk on asset. You have annual rate of occurrence or ARO, the probability the risk will occur in a particular year. You are annualized the loss of expectancy, which is the product of ARO and SLE. Okay? So it could look something like this. So you have categories, the impact, likelihood, and the risk level. And as you can see, the risk level is a product of impact and likelihood. In identifying and implement controls, you have technical controls like access controls, antivirus software, firewalls. In administrative, you have security planning and implementing rules. Operational, you have security personnel, data backup, contingency plan, system maintenance. We monitor The risk assessment is a repetitive process, represents a snapshot in time. Risks should be properly documented, will be the baseline for future reassessment of the environment. Monitoring organization systems and infrastructure by means of risk assessment facilitates conducting a security audit. So what's a security audit? It follows the same steps of risk assessment. The main difference is that a security audit looks at proof that the best practices and procedures were followed. In a security audit, you look for potential for unauthorized access, RF leakage beyond the physical perimeter, use of weak encryption protocols, existence of rogue access point, if pre-shared keys are used, how widely the pre-shared key is known, knowledge, training, and awareness of security personnel and staff, wireless network conformity to the company's security policy. A security risk assessment is conducted at the beginning of a security management cycle. It's a repetitive checking process that occupies throughout the cycle. Purpose is to ensure that organization adheres to its own security policy. In this chapter, we looked at risk assessments, IT security management, security risk management stages, as security audits.